phase one of the practices of Dujam Lingpa, that is, of the great perfection, involve Shamata, Vipassana, and identifying Rigpa. And so we have reached the point where it is time to identify Rigpa if we are going to complete phase one in our retreat. And just so that you know, there are 8 phases in actually achieving full awakening. So I remember when I first encountered these teachings and heard about resting in pristine awareness, I thought that has got to be very close to the end. So it's interesting to just think that we might have to rearrange our standards a little bit for our practice. And actually, first of all, recognize that Shamata, Vipassana, and identifying Rigpa all go together into a single package. Just call it phase one. And so when we achieve Shamata, and we are resting in the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss of Shamata, we are going to be seduced, like all of the sages were before the time of the Buddha, into thinking, what could be better than this? And so there is a natural tendency to grasp to that state and just think, what's wrong with this? Samsara is not so bad after all. If this is samsara, this is not so bad. And all I have to do is arrange my schedule so that I can spend more and more and more time in retreat. Simple as that. And you have enlightenment or good enough in this lifetime. So I think there is a natural temptation to do that, and I think many practitioners know exactly what I'm talking about. That just practice becomes very, very alluring, and the peace and the serenity, the relative absence of mental afflictions, because what is there to become afflicted about in a place like this? You don't have to do any cooking, you don't have to do any shopping, you don't have to answer any calls, no emails. This is pretty easy. This is a laboratory, and this is where if we are going to develop basic skills, then it's in a setting like this. Lama Ellen sometimes describes our retreats like for premature babies. Being in one of those enclosed environments where no germs can get in, it's perfect temperature, everything, so all of the conditions, we're like premature babies. And if anything comes in, that's a potential disease, like maybe the sound of a tractor. This is enough to activate grasping. Don't they know we're in retreat? Can't Catherine do something? I'm trying to meditate after all. And so, this compared with what most people anyway are going to be returning to, you could say is pretty controlled conditions. And then once we leave here, once we get to the train station, then, life occurs again. And then we lose control of a lot of the stimulation, a lot of the things that are going to happen to us. And that then is the time to, now is it, I don't have time to practice, or now is when I really need to practice. And it doesn't mean that you have to hide yourself away in your room and just come out slowly. Although that's very good advice, to not, to come out slowly, emerge, step by step by step. But hiding away is not going to be the answer. It is going to be maintaining the view that you have glimpsed, whatever that might be, and expanding it, continuing to expand it, and using all of the opportunities that arise every day to be part of your practice. So the grasping to realizations of whatever form that they happen, I think many people, so sometimes I had mentioned that people have spontaneous realizations of non-duality, and they are glimpses of the moon. And it might have occurred when you were 13. It might have occurred a long time ago. And we grasp onto that still, that powerful memory of, still identifying that. I am the kind of person, I am the person who had a experience of non-duality when they were 13. I am a protege. I am, like Mozart, somebody who was born into this life with very little dust in their eyes. I've gotten a little busy since then. But, I'm not that far from retirement. From retirement. Or retirement age, anyway. In fact, I'm past it. So, anyway, where are we? Still in phase one. Shamata, Vipassana, and identifying Rigpa. And so the first thing that we are going to do when we achieve Shamata then, so achieving Shamata, why not just say, state that as our goal. So when we achieve Shamata, because this really, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Alan Wallace have had many conversations about this, and Alan Wallace and many Nyingma Lamas and Mahamudra Lamas. Everyone recognizes that Shamata makes everything possible downstream from it. And many people lament or comment that there is just very little emphasis, or there's insufficient emphasis in almost every school on actually developing Shamatha and making that the stated explicit goal of the path. That we are going to, in this school, we are going to just work on Shamatha with enough Vipassana, within the umbrella view, but we are going to approach the view by way of meditation. So this is, there are plenty of citations in scriptures that say this is the preferred approach, or this is going to be the approach that is going to prove to be most successful. So let's just say that we have decided to do that. And we are going to devote ourselves to the development of Shamatha, however long it takes. And one of the important elements about developing this recognition of the continuity of consciousness So I think you could call it a realization, a confidence in that this is true. Is that I think it can change your perspective about your practice. And I can remember that the important thing is to relax and give up striving for your practice. So that doesn't mean that you don't have goals, that you don't have powerful aspirations that motivate your practice. But the insistence on success and achievement, just the Western work ethic, and seasoned with consumerism, thinking that I can purchase my way with enough books, with enough teachings, with going to and flying across the country or across the world enough times, that I can consume my way to the goal. But what's really needed, of course, is enough good teachings, spending enough time with our lamas. But then what our lamas want us to do is to wear out cushions. So I lost my point because it's definitely not in my outline. Consume our way back. So was I lucid or not? While I was dreaming here. Anyway, I'll just start over. So what is the most direct route, actually, to cutting through substrate consciousness? First of all, we have to recognize that substrate consciousness is a very important goal. But as Dujam Lingpa says, if that's all we do, we haven't advanced one hair's breadth towards liberation. Because our mental afflictions they're only suppressed, you could say, during the time that we are actually meditating. But they are not eradicated. The seeds of mental afflictions are not eradicated. And that requires vipassana practice. That requires wisdom, the integration of Shamata and vipassana. And so the first thing that we have to do is to give up grasping to the non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss, because our lamas have instructed us, given us the big picture, the full context. And so that's what I am trying to do here with phase 1, is to give you enough of the big picture, not so that you're necessarily going to achieve that by just having a conceptual picture of it, but that you know exactly the big picture so that you know the part that Shamata plays within that. And Shamata is a necessary step, but it is still not the goal. And you will not have achieved one hair's breadth towards liberation. Now I remember what it was where I was headed, with relaxation and continuity of consciousness. So remember that I mentioned that if you haven't really come to develop confidence in that continuity, that consciousness is not going to end with this when you die, then it would be a good use of your life to simply do all of the research, all of the investigation, all the reflection, all the debate, go to all the teachings, take university courses. That might steer you in the wrong direction, however. But really come to terms with that. Because here's something that I recall from my own experience. When I was obsessed in the practice of Tantra, because of my great compassion, of course, that I was obsessed with becoming enlightened in this life, and that didn't even entertain the possibility of dying without becoming enlightened. And so I spent quite a number of years actually practicing Tantra with that heavy, heavy responsibility and that heavy, heavy weight of, okay, time's passing, but, is this fast enough? Is this, am I doing enough? Etc. So it's very important, of course, to recognize the preciousness of this human life, to practice like your hair's on fire, but also to take the long view. And that long view is simply that there's going to be another lifetime. And so there is, if you have the very powerful goal, for instance, of achieving liberation, of achieving shamatha, of the irreversible, spontaneous bodhicitta, you have these landmarks of Buddhist practice. If these are your powerful, powerful goal, and you don't achieve those goals in this lifetime, has your life been wasted? Not at all, right? Because first of all, what is there more meaningful to do in this life? But secondly, you're going to be planting very, very powerful karmic seeds. And so what is it that causes karmic seeds to ripen, especially in what is sometimes translated as throwing karma? Which realm you're born into, and then the circumstances, the environmental karmas that govern which, the family that you're born into, all the circumstances, all of that. Well, sometimes it's said that it's unfinished business. And so if you have a very powerful goal, for instance, in this life to be a hockey player or a ballerina, and this is a powerful goal, but you just never got to it, and you die, your whole life you're obsessed with this goal, and you never have attained it, well then, very likely in the next lifetime, if everything else works out and you've had a virtuous life, etc., and you're reborn as a human, that karmas will ripen so that, your mother sends you to ballet classes and things like that. You are, why is it that, so in Dujam Lingpa's presentation where he starts, he says there is a placement exam. So you just go off to a remote place for 21 days. Oh, placement exam. An examination that tells you what class that you enter. Like if you're learning you have some language skills, and then you go to university and you take an exam and they say, well, you go into this class, you go into the advanced class because of your ability. And so Dujam Lingpa says you go off to a remote place for 21 days and then just simply merge your mind with space for 21 days. And first of all, if you're a person of superior faculties, then all you have to do is to hear the instructions, basically, to merge your mind in space, and you go right into Rigpa. And apparently there are great prodigies that are able to do that. And it's said then, like with the case of Bahiya, in the Sutra of Bahiya, he had the shortest Dharma career in all of Buddhism. All he had to do was hear these, very short lines of instruction, basically. It's a very short sutra. And by the time that the Buddha finished the sutra, he'd become a stream enterer. And it's said that he had very little dust in his eyes. So how is it that a person becomes one of these people with very little dust in their eyes? It's simply because of unfinished business of the previous life. People obviously have an obsession for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of achieving shamatha, cutting through to pristine awareness. And then each successive lifetime, because all of these practices are naturally going to lead you to lead a virtuous life, etc. Create all of the conditions necessary. And then to honor your teachers so that you will, in the next lifetime, not have to spend so much of your life looking for a teacher. You will find teachers more quickly, etc. All the conditions will line up. And then just lifetime after lifetime. So I remember when Lama Allen first said that, and just what a sigh of relief I let out. Just, wow. It makes total sense to me. And so just relax, do the best that you can, and recognize that there's just nothing else that you would rather be doing. All of the other allures of samsara have no meaning, so you don't have to worry about discipline as your motivation. Just relax, do the best that you can, make the best progress that you can, and if you die with unfinished business, be ready to take advantage of the process of death, because of your good preparation, and then get on with it. So anyway, back to substrate consciousness. Eliminating, basically what we want to do is to eliminate the grasping to the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss when we achieve shamatha. And then we recognize that in the big picture, this is a necessary step, but we still haven't taken advanced one hair's breadth towards actual liberation or the omniscience of a Buddha. So then that is the point at which we do vipassana practice. And then we can do all kinds of vipassana practices, but there are, within the Dzogchen and Mahamudra context, you can do, if you achieve shamatha, then any vipassana practice that you do is going to be much more effective. You're going to be able to move from conceptualized analysis to placement meditation and resting in the realization, first of all, as Pabanka Rinpoche calls it, the contrived experiential realization, and then the uncontrived experiential realization. Because of your shamatha, you do that very quickly, and you just go step after step after step. And this is why Karma Chagme says, after you achieve shamatha, direct perception of emptiness, quickly. Well, not finger snap, but within a brief time, a week or a month, is what he says. So that's very, very quickly after the achievement of shamatha. So you achieve shamatha, but recognize that it's not enough. And so this is the point then in the texts where the lamas, in order to instill this sense that shamatha is sufficient but not enough, they then point out all the distinctions between shamatha and pristine awareness. And so that you recognize that the luminosity and non-conceptuality is still, the relative mind is still a mind of samsara, and that the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss that you are going to experience in the pristine awareness or primordial consciousness is absolute, immutable bliss, absolute non-conceptuality rather than the relative non-conceptuality of substrate and Shamata, and the luminosity that actually knows appearances as they come into existence as spontaneous displays of emptiness itself. So you're going to be resting in this timeless state beyond the 8 extremes of birth and death, coming and going, of beginning and ending, of being one or many. All of these things just don't compute. You just cannot use conceptual mind to understand or even begin to fathom, to appreciate what this world is like of pristine awareness. So we just have to rely on the experience of the masters who have traveled the path and have come back and returned to give us details about it. And what we know is that the veils of Rigpa, what obscures Rigpa, you could say are like 3 layers of clouds. The lowest and probably densest layer is the 5 obscurations. So these are the obscurations that are preventing us from experiencing the non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss of substrate. So those, again, are obsession with hedonic pleasure. So you could just call that craving, really. And then ill will, so you call that hostility, aggression, malice, all of that. So basically those 2 mental afflictions. And then you have excitation and laxity, the 2 meditation faults, and then afflictive uncertainty or doubt, afflictive doubt. So those 5 are preventing you from experiencing the non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss of substrate. And then when you get to substrate, there are still 2 more layers of clouds that are preventing you from perceiving the moon directly. And the first of these then would be the grasping to the luminosity and non-conceptuality and bliss of Shamata, thinking this is good enough. What could be better than these 3? So that is going to prevent you from cutting through, and then because there's no motivation to cut through, and then also the very subtle identification of myself as being a sentient being who is striving to become liberated. So that subtle grasping as myself as a sentient being who wants to become liberated is the final, most subtle obscuration of actually cutting through to Rigpa. And so here are a few of the distinctions. And in the texts, there are many, many, many pages of distinctions between substrate and substrate consciousness and pristine awareness, and they become quite technical. But this really, these citations will really capture the essence. Again, in what I now just abbreviate the title to Mud and Feathers from Dujam Lingpa. So in Mud and Feathers, Dujam Lingpa says, the substrate as the essential nature of the mind is darkness like the night. Thoughts arise as dualistic grasping at the apprehender and the apprehended. And the close identification with joy and sorrow is like the reification of a dream as being truly existent. So here he's again giving us that whole architecture of the mind. Basically, that substrate is unaware like darkness. And then because out of this darkness then comes all of the appearances, and especially, first of all, the dualistic grasping of apprehender and apprehended, klishta-manas, and then all of these appearances that arise as other, I grasp to them as inherently existent, and then just feel joy and sorrow, and reify all of these, what are mental appearances in nature, grasp to them as being truly existent, and then all of the suffering of samsara ensues. And then he continues, it is not the essential nature of the sky to change throughout the course of the day and night, but its manifest nature is affected by the sun. Likewise, in terms of its essential nature, the mind does not change, but a distinction is made between pristine awareness and the mind based on the distinction between primordial consciousness and ignorance. So there is only one ground, but there is a distinction between the unaware aspect of the ground, which is substrate, and the aware aspect of the ground, which is dharmakaya. The ground itself doesn't change. So this is the essential nature of the ground. The essential nature of the ground is emptiness. Whether these appearances come out of the unaware aspect of the ground of substrate or the absolute space of awareness, the ground itself doesn't change. But the manifest nature then does change. So that is like the passage of day and night and the weather through the day, but the sky itself doesn't change. And so the distinction between mind and primordial consciousness is ignorance. So this is why, in order to cut through what remains at substrate consciousness, we need vipassana practice. We need to apply wisdom based on shamatha and to use all of the reasonings as well of the conceptual mind to actually understand and grasp the ultimate nature of all of these appearances. And again, this is exactly what His Holiness was saying, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was saying when he said that not satisfied with appearances of phenomena, we grasp onto them as being inherently existent. So all we have to do is recognize appearances as appearances and let them be, not grasp onto them, and we will have eliminated the ignorance that keeps us bound in substrate and in samsara. So we have to realize emptiness in order to cut through to pristine awareness. And that is a very important goal in all schools of Buddhism and all paths of Buddhism and all yanas. So Shravaka yana also, that is the direct perception of emptiness, is very important milestone. But what is here, what is important also, is that we not only see emptiness, but that while we are resting in the empty nature of the mind, of pristine awareness, we also are seeing dependent origination. And we are seeing these appearances arise and we are knowing the dependent origination of these appearances, meaning that they are spontaneous displays of mind itself. But this dependent origination, you could say, maybe that's not exactly the right term, because they are non-dual. They are not the appearances that arise, which you could call nirmanakaya, are the non-dual displays of the luminosity of the mind, which is sambhogakaya, and the emptiness of the mind, which is dharmakaya. And all of these then are recognized along with not just the direct perception of emptiness, but then every appearance that arises while you are resting in Rigpa appears to you in exactly that way. And so the elegance of this approach is that our access to Rigpa is the immediate present moment of consciousness. And oftentimes in Mahamudra schools, and teachers refer to pristine awareness as ordinary consciousness. And I think, when we hear that term ordinary consciousness, we would think this is the mind of a sentient being, the deluded mind of a sentient being, that is reifying all appearances. But in Mahamudra, ordinary consciousness is the uncontaminated primordial consciousness of pristine awareness. And so we access that pristine awareness through every moment of experience. And so we access it with the present moment of experience. And then it's very interesting to ask, what is the present moment? Because the present moment is this thin slice of time between the past and the future, neither of which exists. So the present moment is sandwiched between two things, neither of which exist. Which is why it can be very spacious. Kalachakra comments in Spacious Path to Freedom, in the freshness of its own present, unfabricated way of being, there is the ordinary consciousness of the present. When it stares at itself, with this observation, there is a vividness in which nothing is seen. This awareness is direct, naked, vivid, unestablished, empty, limpid luminosity, unique, non-dual clarity, and emptiness. It is not other than this very self-awareness. This is a real introduction to the primordial nature of being. So the present moment of awareness is saturated with Rigpa, with pristine awareness. It's as if pristine awareness is hidden in plain sight. But it is just obscured from us by our identification of being the mind of a sentient being. So Gyatro Rinpoche comments on this, again in Spacious Path to Freedom, when he's commenting, specifically the context of this, was commenting on stage of generation practice. He said, the essential point is to purify our grasping onto impurity so that pure vision can arise. This is exactly what we're doing, is purifying our grasping onto the impure vision of ourselves as being sentient beings. Meaning, again, that doesn't mean that I don't have a human body, that I don't have a human mind, that I don't have human speech, but that this is all that I am. This is the total truth. And so ultimate truth and relative truth don't negate each other, but it is our belief that relative truth is the totality, is everything that there is. Our identification and belief in that obscures the greater truth of absolute reality. So he says the essential point is to purify our grasping onto impurity so that pure vision can arise. The whole thrust of great perfection practice is primordial reality. This has always been the case. It is not something that we fabricate or imagine. Rather, it is a reality to be discovered. So we don't use our imagination to conceive what primordial consciousness might be like in the same way that we might imagine ourselves in stage of generation practice in Tantra to be a divine being. So we don't pretend that we are resting in pristine awareness. All we do is discover the reality that is already there. He says it is a reality to be discovered. We don't fabricate. We don't imagine it. The various divine embodiments are all qualities of a single awareness, your own. Moreover, all the qualities of the Buddha, which far surpass our imagination, are qualities of our present awareness. It's astonishing that we fixate on the 8 mundane concerns by pinning our hopes on them and ignoring our own treasure trove of awareness. So all the divine embodiments, all the qualities of a Buddha, are already present in every ordinary moment of perception. Extraordinary. So the term identification of Rigpa means that we have our first taste of viewing reality from the perspective of pristine awareness. So to identify Rigpa, or to identify pristine awareness, means that this now is our point of view. So I mentioned that our point of view, or the perspective from which we are viewing reality, it can change all the way from downstream at the very bottom, where we are reifying every appearance that we see as being truly existent. And so at that point, our whole practice becomes managing circumstances. So because all of these external things either give me happiness or cause me pain, I manage all of the external things to try to create happiness and avoid pain in me. So that would be the lowest. All animals do that as well. So our point of view, so this is the way that reality looks to us. This is reality from this point of view. But then as our point of view changes, as it evolves, moving back upstream, then reality is going to change for us. Our experience of reality is going to change. So we can actually experience sensory impressions, for instance, or perceptions without conceptions. Reality appears different to us when we're doing that. And then we can change our perspective also to where our perspective actually is resting in substrate consciousness. And at that point, we can have a non-conceptual mind that is perceiving all of the conceptual mind of mental consciousness at work. So we are, at that point then, from this perspective, we are viewing the mind from outside the mind. And then, at this point, when we are resting in luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss, we are, Yangtang Rinpoche says, very, very close to actual pristine awareness. And Lama Ellen describes this as like being a rice paper wall in a Japanese house. It's very easy to cut through. And so when we cut through substrate consciousness, we actually then will be cutting through to pristine awareness. And when we cut through substrate, we are cutting through to Dharmadhatu, which is the absolute space of phenomena. And sometimes, well, just another footnote, Dujam Lingpa, and it seems that many Dzogchen teachers or great lamas don't distinguish at this point when you are resting in pristine awareness and describing pristine awareness, don't distinguish between Dharmakaya and Dharmadhatu. And they use the terms interchangeably. And so you just have to know from context whether they're talking about the luminous quality or the emptiness quality, or the absolute space of phenomena. So oftentimes the clarification, the way to speak most clearly about this is the luminous nature, which is the manifest nature, the essential nature, which is the emptiness of pristine awareness or primordial consciousness, and that is the absolute space of phenomena. And then so you have the essential nature, the manifest nature, and then the all-pervasive nature, which would be Nirmanakaya. So you have then Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya as the three bodies of a Buddha, but Dharmakaya and Dharmadhatu are synonymous in this presentation. And then all of these are non-dual, so they are not three individual aspects like they are in non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. And so it's very important, especially Yangtang Rinpoche will tell us tonight in Pith Instructions, that luminosity and emptiness are non-dual. And this is the way that they are experienced in pristine awareness. And when we cut through to pristine awareness, and which is the great perfection, then there is nothing more to do. It's said the practice then becomes simply resting in pristine awareness and maintaining the view of the great perfection. So that's all there is to do. There's no more meditation practice once you cut through to pristine awareness. And the instructions specifically say, don't go back to conceptual practice. Don't go back to vipassana. Don't do stage of generation practice. Don't do completion stage practice. All of these things are going backwards. Once you rest in pristine awareness, there is just nothing more to do. That doesn't mean that more won't happen, because there are 7 stages beyond that. So more will happen, but all of it happens except for what's called tukgyal, which is the direct crossing over or leap over practices. There is a little bit to do with those. That's basically where you travel through the bhumis in clusters. You leap across clusters of bhumis, go from level the first bhumi to the 5th bhumi, because you're doing this from the point of view not of an Arya Bodhisattva, but now from a Vijayadhara, someone who is resting in pristine awareness. So the progress through the bhumis happens more quickly also. But those practices are very, very simple. So it's said that basically when you achieve and are resting in pristine awareness, the practice is called non-meditation. All you are doing is maintaining the view of pristine awareness. And so there is no striving, no activity, no desire, and no modifying of any appearances that come up. You just are resting in the recognition that all of these appearances that arise are empty displays of pristine awareness itself. And all of appearance appears to you that way. So it's only maintaining the view of the great perfection that you do at that point. Because as long as we are striving, as long as we are acting and wishing for some result, or modifying appearances, or trying to make sure that only appearances of nirvana arise and no samsaric appearances, then we are acting from the platform of being a sentient being, rather than from the platform of an awakened Buddha. So we just maintain the view of the great perfection. And then while we are resting in this state, all of these appearances are going to appear to us as one taste. So you hear this term frequently, one taste, meaning that all of these appearances have the equal purity, that all appearances, regardless of whether it's a pleasant or what would be an unpleasant appearance to a sentient being, all of these are equally pure. And this is the way that they appear to you, as all have the single taste of pure displays of absolute space of phenomena. And so this is a little more of what Orgyen Dorje Drolo had to tell Dujam Lingpa in his advice for how to stabilize in Rigpa. Again, under this series of heading, or the heading of Collapse the False Cave. Even though you recognize the phenomenal world as consisting of mental apparitions, so even though you recognize all appearances as mind, if you grasp at the deluded agent as being internal and the delusive appearances as being external, like an illusion and an illusionist, or a dream and a dreamer, you are tightly bound by chains of dualistic grasping. Instead, know that the conceptualized self that is grasped as I, and all its aspects that are established as the external physical world and its internal sentient inhabitants, are arising within the expanse of the all-pervasive essential nature of the mind, devoid of a center and a periphery. Samsara and nirvana are wholly present as your own perceptions, and they are wholly included within the expanse of the essential nature. All of these appearances, samsara and nirvana, equally pure, all displays of the absolute space of phenomena. And so, while we are watching these appearances, there's no need, obviously, if they are all equally pure, there's nothing that you have to do. There is no striving, no desire, no modification. You don't have to fix any of these appearances. The Tantra of inborn inconceivability states, since that which is inborn is free of conceptual elaboration, there is nothing on which to meditate. Do not interrupt the flow of the objectless awareness. So this is all we're doing, resting in the continuous flow of objectless awareness. Because if we are meditating on something, we are going to be activating the conceptual mind. And then the great Brahman, Saraha, says, once you have seen your own mind free of conceptual elaboration, contemplation in which you ceaselessly produce elaborations is like searching for a glass trinket after having found a precious gem. So here what he is referring to is analytical meditation. So you would definitely, when you're resting in pristine awareness, not be activating the conceptual mind by doing analytical meditation. Tilopa says, like the state of space, the mind transcends thought. Set it at ease in its own nature, without rejecting it or maintaining it. When the mind is without objective content, it is Mahamudra. Through familiarization with that, supreme enlightenment is achieved. So again, he mentions here, or implies, Tilopa does, that you can rest your mind in this non-objective, in an absence of objective content. Basically just the flow of awareness itself. And you do this as a progression. It's not that you cross a threshold and you have never done that before and then suddenly that's all that there is. But that you will have glimpses of it. You will have experiences of it in your meditation. And then he says, through familiarization with that, this is how you stabilize Rigpa. So we have glimpses of Rigpa. The clouds part. We actually have an experience of the genuine moon, and then the clouds form again. And maybe it's a couple of years before we have another experience. And then you devote yourself to that. The more that you have that experience, it then becomes like a magnet that just draws you and your practice. Now with great enthusiasm, with zeal. Now there's nothing you would rather be doing. You have a choice of a day of powder skiing at Mont Blanc or staying in your room and meditating. And the choice is easy. You choose to meditate because you can do anything that you want and there's nothing you would rather be doing. Why is that? Because what could be better than just resting in the flow of awareness that sees all appearances truly? And then Gyatro Rinpoche comments, as paradoxical as it may seem, non-conceptual realization of emptiness can be sustained in the midst of conceptualization, but only if the nature of the mind itself has been realized. This is really extraordinary, that you can have a non-conceptual experience of meditation. Once you have, let's just say, realized emptiness, once you have realized the nature of the mind itself, once you have experienced pristine awareness, then you can be resting in a non-conceptual state of emptiness, even in the midst of conceptuality. And this then leads us to these comments from His Holiness the Dalai Lama that are technical and may be challenging for people who have no background in Tantra or in subtle body practice. But if you do have, so if if this doesn't make any sense to you, just take it as something that to be curious about. What are they talking about? And if you do have some background in this is mind-blowing, frankly. Okay, and this comes from a book. What's interesting to me, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that publishers in last year brought out 2 books of teachings, one from Lama Yeshe on Mahamudra, of teachings from the early 1980s, and just published last year, called Mahamudra. I forget the subtitle, but it's on your reading list at the very last page of your handout. And then there is a text also that was just published this year called The Heart of Meditation, and which is a book of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and his teachings in the 1980s also on Dzogchen. So His Holiness did 2 tours, at least 2 anyway, but I think primarily 2 tours of at least the United States, and I'm sure of Europe also, in which he explicitly on this tour taught Dzogchen in the 1980s. And His Holiness, in many of his comments, reconciles the New Translation and Old Translation schools, Dzogchen practice, and Gelugpa practice, and he puts them in this larger picture where you see how they fit together and what the role of each of them is and why practitioners might be attracted to one rather than the other, without maintaining respect for both of them, and without saying one is better. They're both obviously very effective. Both of them have produced realized masters, but they have different roles. And so here's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has to say about identifying the clear light in the midst of any consciousness. And so the New Translation schools, there are 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and the Old Translation school is the Nyingma school. This is the school that Dzogchen comes out of. And then the New Translation schools are the other 3 schools, but within the New Translation school of the Kagyus is Mahamudra, which is very much like the Old Translation school, even though it's a separate lineage. But His Holiness says, in the New Translation schools, actualization of the fundamental innate mind of clear light, simultaneous with manifestation of the 6 operative consciousnesses, what I've been calling the 6 primary consciousnesses, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mental consciousness, is said to be impossible. So if we just condense that, he's saying that experience of clear light, while these 6 primary consciousnesses are operating, is impossible. So this is what the New Translation school, so Geluks and Sakyas would say this within their philosophy and application of Tantra. According to the New Translation schools, it is necessary first to dissolve all coarser consciousnesses, to render them as though incapacitated. Only then will the fundamental mind nakedly appear. According to the New Translation schools, it is impossible for coarse and subtle consciousness to occur simultaneously. So this is why you dissolve all of the coarse consciousnesses into emptiness, and you do that actually with the movement of prana in the body into the central channel and dissolving into bindu of clear light at the heart, etc. But all of the coarse consciousnesses disappear, they dissolve, because they can't be in existence at the same time that clear light is. And then he continues, In the old translation school of the Great Completeness, on the other hand, it is possible to be introduced to the clear light without the cessation of 6 operative consciousnesses. And so, in the experience of clear light, or let's just say of emptiness, in the new translation schools, there are no appearances whatsoever. Because these appearances depend on conceptuality, on conceptual designation. And so in the absence of conceptual designation, everything disappears. There is no object of awareness. And in Tantra anyway, it's said that all that exists is the mind of bliss. So this clear light mind, there is no appearance, only the mind of bliss. And then so you have then in this approach of Dzogchen and Mahamudra, now there are going to be appearances, even while you are resting in clear light of pristine awareness. Appearances don't stop. And you will hear things, you will see things, you can taste things. So this becomes very portable. You can take your pristine awareness with you, because this is every moment of ordinary consciousness is infused or arises out of, is a better way of putting it, arises out of pristine awareness. So amazing that you're going to be resting in pristine awareness, but appearances will continue. And then as you're resting in this pristine awareness, you recognize that, and you're resting in clear light, that there's nothing to do, because all of these appearances of sight, sound, taste, etc., even of conceptuality, of mental consciousness, even all of those are pure appearances of temporary crystallizations of absolute space of phenomena. He continues, even when an afflictive emotion is generated in an encounter with an object upon which we falsely superimpose a goodness or badness beyond its nature, the afflictive emotion itself has the nature of being an entity of mere luminosity and knowing. So this is, he says, a diluted consciousness, even one that is perceiving duality of subject here, object over there, and perceives that object to be a cause of my mental affliction. The mental affliction itself is what he calls a mere entity of luminosity and knowing. Since the mind of clear light has the general character of mind as an entity of mere luminosity and knowing, the general factor of the clear light can be identified even in the midst of any coarse afflictive consciousness, such as desire or hatred. So, are these even mental afflictions then at this point? These are... I'll just take a break at this moment here to mention something about the essential nature of mental afflictions. So are mental afflictions inherently mental afflictions? Or inherently afflictive, probably be a better way to put it. What is the essential nature of anger? In Dzogchen, it's said to be the relative essential nature of anger is you have these three qualities: non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. And so the essential nature of anger is luminosity, is clarity. And you can feel that, I think, when you experience anger, there is a sense of tremendous power, of clarity. There is a rush of adrenal hormones. You feel very alive. It is the opposite of falling asleep. So the essential nature, or you could say the relative essential nature, is a luminosity or clarity. And then there are, again, a little more technical. When you're resting in pristine awareness, there are said to be 5 facets of primordial consciousness. And these are all related to the 5 Buddha families. And so what is the absolute nature of anger? It is mirror-like pristine awareness. So you have each of these, every mental affliction, or the 5 primary anyway, have a relative essential nature and then an absolute essential nature, so that even these are not inherently afflictive. It's only when we are grasping to them, our point of view is down here of subject and object, that, and we are grasping to the reified object as the cause of my mental affliction, that it would be truly afflictive. But His Holiness is saying that the afflictive emotion itself still has this essential nature of being luminous and knowing. And so that has implications. So you can identify clear light in the midst of any coarse and afflictive consciousness. Thus, the difference between the old translation school and the new translation schools is that when beginning the practice of identifying innermost awareness in the great completeness, or Dzogchen, or great completeness is just how Jeffrey Hopkins translates the great perfection. Such stoppage of the 6 primary consciousnesses is not necessary. Rather, leaving the coarser consciousnesses as they are, the yogi identifies the clear light. When this identification has been accomplished, it is not necessary purposely to eliminate conceptions of goodness and badness. Instead, no matter what type of conception may arise, it has no power of deception over the practitioner, who is able to remain one-pointedly focused on the feature of mere luminosity and knowing. Thereby, the conditions for generating the improper mental activity of making false superimpositions upon phenomena diminish in strength, and conceptuality cannot really get started, gradually lessening in strength. In this way, the doctrine of the Great Perfection comes to have a unique mode of presenting the view, meditation, and conduct for someone who has been introduced to innermost awareness and has identified it well. So if you know about pristine awareness and you've had glimpses of it, you've identified it, your shamatha practice is going to be really different. Now you're going to be able to have that experience, let's not say not of clear light, maybe not of even shamatha itself, but you're going to have a taste of what that experience would be like, of resting in simultaneous stillness and motion, recognizing these appearances that are arising with the 4 points. All appearances are mind. Mind is empty. Emptiness is spontaneous actualization. Spontaneous actualization is self-liberating. All of that you can have a taste of while you are just doing your shamatha practice, focusing on maintaining stillness of awareness while the movement of appearances just continues. And so you can see, I think, that basically this practice of shamatha, when you break through the rice paper thin wall, is really very, very, very close to doing non-meditation, resting in pristine awareness. So it's not as if it's going to be totally unfamiliar to you. It's just going to be more true, more subtle. It's going to be absolute rather than relative. And then just a few more citations. Kamalashila says, thinking, quote, all phenomena are ultimately devoid of an inherent nature, and pondering no inherent nature exists at all, is to abandon genuine wisdom. This should make any Gelugpa shudder. Because these are thoughts, that in the New Translation School we cultivate, right? These are statements about the absolute nature of reality. All phenomena are devoid of inherent nature. No inherent nature exists at all. But the key word here is to ponder or thinking. So Kamalashila says that thinking that is to abandon genuine wisdom. With respect to such an object that transcends existence and non-existence, consciousness also transcends existence and non-existence. Meditate like that without an object. So no conceptuality, even of, the truth of reality. So obviously these are as true as conceptuality gets. There are no inherently existent phenomena. That is as true or as close to truth that conceptuality is going to bring you. But even that is abandoning wisdom once you get to this point, and you just meditate without an object. And then the Mahasiddhamaitripa states, and here I just want to alert you to the use of the word vividness. And so there is always a question in shamatha practice, or it certainly has arisen for me over the many years, of when you get to a medium laxity, it's said that you are still maintaining your continuous engagement with the object, but that there is an absence of vividness in the engagement. And so we've talked about what clarity is. And so the question is vividness just more clarity? Or what is this vividness? So every time I heard this in the past, that all you need to do is to add vividness to your stability in order to get past, it was called subtle laxity at that point. I always thought, well, where do you get this laxity? Or where do you get vividness? What is it? Is it like a secret ingredient that you just add to flavor the stew? Where is it? What is it? So here is what the best description of vividness is, and how you can, first of all, what is required to have this experience is vividness, but then this experience also produces great vividness. So the Mahasiddhamaitripa says, there is pristine awareness, for there is no grasping onto signs. It is luminous, for it is by nature clear light. It is unmediated, for it is not contaminated by the dualistic grasping of ideation. It is vivid, for it knows its own nature. So this is interesting, equating vivid with seeing the nature, with wisdom. Regard the essence of mind itself as the empty Dharmakaya. As it is unceasingly clear, regard it as the Sambhogakaya. Regard self-arising, self-release, manifold appearances as the Nirmanakaya. And then lastly, from the Pith Instructions on the Clear Expanse. In this ineffable reality, free of elaboration, by simply not impeding its radiance, everything appears. Know that the essence of appearances is empty, without an object, and free of the intellect. Not being separated from that reality is called vividness. So this, I think, for me, is a very helpful description of what vividness is. It is recognizing appearances for exactly what they are in the moment that they arise. And of course, this is going to take yeah, so it's, aha. So, vividness then, being vivid, being vividly engaged with your object is to know its reality, to know it for what it is, that it is simply a display of the absolute space of phenomena, that it is a temporary crystallization of space that dissolves back into space. And you just watch that as it unfolds. And so as you are resting in this mind of Dharmakaya, the luminous nature of the mind, which is Sambhogakaya, is continually and non-dually illuminating appearances as creative displays of the absolute space of phenomena, Dharmadhatu, to create all of these appearances which are Nirmanakaya. And to see all of that in the moment that an appearance arises is to be vividly engaged with your object. And so we will try to do something like that when we come back at 3:05. Begin by settling the body in its natural state. And use this settling as a preliminary by first relaxing the body, releasing tension, Resting in pristine awareness is a state of ultimate relaxation. Doing nothing. Feeling no impulses to act. So release more and more subtle obscurations of that state. By giving up all identification with this being my body. That this is a body of a sentient being. And that is the only truth. So as Master Shantideva said, release everything at once. That is nirvana. So begin by releasing all conceptual knowing of the body. And know the body only as tactile sensation. It's said that the difference between a Buddha and a sentient being is that a Buddha knows who they are. So give up your identification with being the body of a sentient being. And discover who you are. The body of a Buddha. Nirmanakaya. The natural state of the body. And settle the speech in its natural state. By giving up all identification with the sounds that we hear, the chattering mind, the chattering voice, that fills every moment of silence. And in this silence, take a step towards the ultimate natural state of the body, of the speech. The Sambhogakaya. and settle the mind in its natural state. The essential nature, which is non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. Let that be your point of view. Which is the view from substrate consciousness. Able to illuminate appearances without becoming them. Still and spacious. Immerse your mind in this non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. Let that fill your experience. And can you recognize that even these, so attractive, so alluring, are mere appearances of mind as well? And can you simply experience those without attachment, without clinging, without identifying to those as me, even though that's all that's left at this point? And in the absence of grasping to even the most subtle experiences of a sentient being, you cut through the rice paper walls that are separating your samsaric reality from the ever-present ordinary moments of pristine awareness. The pristine awareness that gives rise to mind, And in the absence of grasping to even the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss, what remains? Only the primordial luminosity and knowing. Rest in this luminous knowing that recognizes all appearances as empty displays of the absolute space of phenomena, temporary crystallizations of space. And as you rest in this absolute stillness, beyond space and time, with no coming or going, no starting or stopping, no existence nor non-existence. All appearances that arise of the five senses, of mental consciousness, all are equally pure displays of the absolute space of phenomena. So view them with one taste. And so there is nothing to do, nothing to strive for, nothing to desire, and nothing to modify. Just let these perfect appearances spontaneously actualize out of the emptiness of space. And watch them as they spontaneously self-release. Back into the absolute space from which they arose. Here in this state of the absolute natural states of the body, speech, and mind, There is no grasping to these appearances. No reification of subject and object. No conceptualization. Once you cut through to pristine awareness, there is no thing to meditate on. You just rest in the view of the great perfection. Recognizing with vivid awareness, in the moment that appearances arise, that all appearances are mind. Mind is empty. Emptiness is spontaneous actualization. And spontaneous actualization is self-liberating. You view the nature of appearances and know their nature vividly in the instant they arise. The essential nature of this primordial consciousness is emptiness, absolute space, Dharmakaya. The manifest nature of this primordial consciousness is luminosity, Sambhogakaya. the all-pervasive nature of this primordial consciousness is all the appearances that arise as spontaneous displays of mind itself, nirmanakaya. All these are your three bodies of the Buddha, your Buddha nature that gives rise to every ordinary moment of perception. Now you know who you are.